Hey everyone and welcome to Storytime. My name is Jake and today we are going to be looking at the subreddit r/prorevenge, where people tell us their best stories on when they got revenge on someone or something they didn't like. If you're new around here, please do hit subscribe down below so that you never miss out on another video. But for now, let's sit back, relax and enjoy some pro-revenge stories. My neighbours forced me to give my dog away. About 3 years ago, when me and my fiance first moved in together, we had a house with two other couples. The house had a covered front porch that literally anybody could see into. It was away from the highway and had a big oak tree in the front yard. We only had neighbours on one side and they seemed nice enough at first. Always said hello and never really gave us any problems. When we first moved in, we had a kitten, but no other animals. One day, the kitten, Thor, got out and we didn't find him for 2 days. I was super heartbroken, of course, until I finally found that he had scaled the oak tree and climbed onto our roof. We didn't have a ladder at the time, we were a bunch of broke college kids. So, we pulled the dining room table outside and were attempting to climb onto the roof. The neighbours saw our struggle and brought us their ladder to get him down. They laughed about the story, no harm done. This comes important later. About 6 months in, me and my fiance, at the time still boyfriend, adopted a dog. He was 1 year old and from an old friend who claimed that the dog was perfectly behaved and was only rehoming him because he was moving. Turns out, Buddy couldn't control his bladder. In fact, he wouldn't even realise he was peeing. He would just stream along as he was walking and never realised. Because of the bladder issues, Buddy would stay outside a lot. If we were home, he would be on his runner outside the tree in the front yard. If we weren't home, we'd put Buddy in his kennel. Originally, the kennel stayed inside, but once Buddy started peeing out the kennel, it was moved onto the porch. It started with a call. Animal control informed us the neighbours had placed a complaint for a barking dog. We explained that we were home and he wasn't barking at all. 2 days later, animal control called again. The neighbours had placed 2 more complaints and Buddy would have to stay inside if we weren't outside with him. Fine, whatever. This just meant more time in the kennel for when we weren't able to actively walk him every 30 minutes. A week later, animal control showed up at our house. The neighbours had placed a complaint that we were locking our dog in a tiny cage and leaving him in the heat. We showed animal control the kennel, which was more than big enough, and where he had water, was inside a covered porch, and was only in it when we weren't home or couldn't give him our full attention. Animal control was doubtful. They said the neighbours claimed we had had the cage in the front yard, and the dog was suffering. We assured them that wasn't the case. A few days later, I got off work to a notice posted on the door from animal control. The neighbours had complained that Buddy was locked in his kennel on the porch and barked for hours and hours. We had to remove the kennel from the porch or we'd be fined. At this point, I was annoyed. So, I walked to their house and asked if Buddy had been barking all day, and if so, why hadn't they said anything to us? The neighbours smiled and said they weren't sure what I was talking about. Buddy hadn't made a peep all day. They certainly wouldn't call animal control on us. I left feeling slightly better, but confused. If they hadn't called them, then who had? 2 nights later, we had friends over. One of said friends was allergic to dogs, so we moved Buddy's kennel to the porch just for while they were there. We were watching a movie. Buddy was silent. He hadn't made a peep. Not an hour into the movie, the cops show up at my house. The cops informed us that the neighbours had placed a complaint against us, stating that we've been abusing our dog and just kept him locked in a cage for days at a time. And he was barking all night long. The police made us show them the kennel, show them the dog, show them his food. They determined we weren't horrible dog abusers, but told my fiance that since he claimed ownership of the dog, he would be arrested if another complaint was placed. He hadn't made a noise. They were coming into our yard to peer into our porch. As my fiance walked onto the porch to retrieve the kennel, he heard the police speaking with the neighbors. "Are you sure they're abusing him? He seemed well fed and happy." Yeah, they kept him locked up 24/7. I've never actually seen him outside of that cage. I don't think they walk him. In fact, they're abusing that cat too. You know, he was up on that roof for 2 days. I had to get my ladder to get him down so he didn't die. And they didn't care at all. They said to get off their property and slammed the door. Yeah, I knew living next to college kids would be rough, but I didn't expect this. So now we couldn't keep Buddy outside and couldn't keep him in the kennel because he'd pee onto the side of the walls. After a week straight of mopping up pee 3 times a day, we decided to rehome Buddy to a house that had a fenced-in yard and no psycho neighbors. My roommate's parents agreed to take him, so we told our first dog goodbye. Exactly 2 days after we rehomed Buddy, Animal Control showed up with a $600 fine. We asked what happened, and we were informed that the neighbors had watched us shove Buddy into that tiny cage and keep him in the yard till he nearly passed out. We got rid of the fine by showing Animal Control we no longer had him and proving the date he was given away. So now I'm dogless, almost out of $600, and really angry. You claim you hear dogs barking? That's fine. I'll make sure that's the only thing you hear all day. I googled the noise allowance for the city. 6 AM to 10 PM was the time that noise complaints couldn't be placed. Game on. I dragged the speakers from the surround sound system onto the back porch and faced them towards the neighbor's house. I pulled up YouTube on the TV. From 6 AM to 10 PM every day for a week, I blasted the sounds of barking dogs directly at their house. No noise complaints could be made. No calls to Animal Control, no calls to the police would help. For 16 hours a day, the neighbors listened to the dogs barking on a loop. Every now and then, they'd come out and stare at our house, but there was nothing they could do. Occasionally, they'd come pound on our door, but we never answered. Day after day, they were subjected to a loop of dogs barking. Their only relief was the hours of 10 PM to 6 AM, or the rare times that someone wasn't home to reset the loop. After a week, around 10:30 at night, we hear the neighbors fighting. She's screaming at him for angering those damn kids with all the lies about the damn dog. He's screaming at her for agreeing to the plan to begin with so that we'd move out and they wouldn't have to deal with crazy parties. Which for the record, we never had. I checked the time. 30 minutes past city ordinances? Time to place a noise complaint. The cops showed up. The husband was extremely drunk and decides he's going to try and hit the cop. Misses entirely. Husband gets arrested. Checkmate. The guy that gave them the dog without telling them about his problems is a real scumbag there. Like, he just wanted to get rid of that dog, he didn't care about it, he just wanted to make the problem someone else's. So I hope the dog's doing alright, and that guy got karma. My grandmother's story of revenge against her parents. This didn't happen to me, but it did to my grandmother, and it's one of the best stories I have ever heard in my entire life. Also, English isn't my first language, so sorry for any spelling mistakes. My grandmother grew up on a huge farm outside of a small town in Sweden. She's the second oldest out of 7 kids, 4 boys and 3 girls. Their parents were very respected in their community because of their farm and their products that they sold to the stores in the town. However, they were horrible to their kids and basically treated them like garbage. They were basically r/entitled parents and r/raised by narcissists, and my grandmother told me stories about some of the things they did that almost made me cry. The dad, my great-grandfather, beat his sons. This really effed all of them up, but especially the oldest of them, who ended up being as horrible as his father. Their mother, on the other hand, was just as bad. At times, she refused to feed her kids because she thought they were too fat, and basically kept her daughters locked up on their farm so they could be as pure as possible, so that they could be married off down the road. The only times they ever really left the house was for school. My grandmother was pulled out of school when she was 13 years old to have her work and basically act as a mother over the rest of her siblings. Or when they went out with either one of the parents or one of their brothers, because they were seen as the golden boys. They couldn't do any wrong. The kids couldn't really tell anyone about what was happening, as no one would believe them because of their parents' high status and social ties to the town. But despite her living situation, my grandmother kept her head high as she was growing up. She's the strongest woman I know. Because so many of the siblings had the same resentment against their parents, they would try and help each other as much as they can and still try to find fun things to do. When my grandmother was 17, one of her younger brothers helped her out of the house and into the next town where they occasionally hosted a dancing night. And there, she just happened to meet the love of her life, my grandfather. According to my grandmother, they danced the entire night and that it was one of the best nights of her life. They continued to meet in secret as her parents would never approve of my grandfather because he was lower class than my grandmother's family. My grandmother knew this very well, but she wasn't having any of it. Along with her siblings, excluding eldest brother, she planned out exactly what she was going to do to get away. Now, her mother owned this ridiculously expensive crystal duck. We are talking insanely expensive for this time period. Grandma arranged to be picked in the middle of the night. She was picked up by my grandfather's friend who owned a car, and she just left. But before she did that, she took the crystal duck with her. This was her petty revenge to her parents. In the previous post, I said that my grandmother signed over her shares of the farm to her sister. Turns out this wasn't the case. My grandmother's sister signed over her share to my grandma, and so did the rest of the siblings, excluding the eldest son. This was done outside of their parents' and eldest son's knowledge. With my grandfather, she moved a few towns over, used the duck to get a loan at a bank, where she used the money to buy a small apartment where she and my grandfather lived, and then waited. My grandfather was drafted for the army and was gone for almost 3 years. And during those 3 years, my grandmother went to medical school and became a nurse shortly after at the local hospital. Then, one day, she hears the news. Her parents are trying to sell the farm. After my grandma left, more of their kids decided to leave their parents too, and after a few years, they didn't have any money left and needed to sell their land. So, my grandmother decides to talk to her parents after several years of not speaking to each other at all. My grandma takes her shares to the farm, which exceeds her parents and her brothers. She also takes her savings. She's the best person when it comes to saving and is able to save as much as she can. And she buys out her parents' and brothers' shares, making her the sole owner of the farm and the land it sat on. She tells her parents that they must leave her land and find somewhere else to live. She then reassigned the shares back to her siblings, excluding her older brother, due to the things he did in the past. And one of her younger brothers didn't want his shares back because he didn't want anything to do with the family. Between the leftover siblings, they decided that the youngest sister would get to live on the farm as she was the only married one and she was pregnant. My grandma and grandpa moved back to her original town. They got married and shortly after, they had my dad. To this day, none of the siblings know what happened to the crystal duck, and oh god, the arguments they had about it over the years. And the sly grin that would always form on my grandmother's face whenever someone mentioned it is priceless. My grandma didn't talk to her parents again after that. She didn't know where they lived or what they did after they moved out of the farm. Her mother tried to reach out to her when her dad died, but she didn't care, and later found out that her mum died a few years later. She didn't attend any of their funerals. She did find out where they are buried, mostly so she'd know where not to be buried. We have all been told by her that, if they bury me at that graveyard, I am coming back to haunt all of you. My grandma and grandpa were married 56 years before my grandfather passed away, and every year on their anniversary, they went back to where they first met, where they still host monthly dances to dance. That was a really good story, but I'm really confused as to how they didn't put one and one together. Like, the grandma runs away one night just randomly, and then the crystal duck also goes away randomly this one night. I wonder who took it. I just want to quickly mention, if you want to check out the other subreddits like r/whoosh and r/choosingbeggars and all the like short little text stories like r/Tinder as well, then you can actually do so on my other channel, which is called Fake Jake. It'll be on screen right now or something and in the description, so that'll be awesome if you could check that out and tell me what you think. Hey everyone, I hope you all had a really good day and that you enjoyed that video. If you want to check out some other videos, then click on screen right now or check out the playlist down below. If you enjoyed that video, then please do leave a like. And if you want to submit your own stories, then you can do so by joining the Discord in the top link in the description. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you very soon.